From the Oregon State University Extension Service, this is Pollination, a podcast that tells the stories of researchers, land managers, and concerned citizens making bold strides to improve the health of pollinators. I'm your host, Dr. Adoni Melathopoulos, Assistant Professor in Pollinator Health in the Department of Horticulture. I'm really pleased this week to invite a guest host, Maggie Graham. She's a Master of Science candidate here at Oregon State University in the Water Resources and Science program. She's going to have a conversation with John Jacob, a beekeeper from Southern Oregon, about solar panels and bees. I hope you enjoy the episode.
Today we're here with John Jacob, Rogue Valley beekeeper of 23 years and president of the Oregon State Beekeepers Association. Welcome to the show, John.
Thank you for having me.
Solar energy and bees aren't topics you'd necessarily expect to hear about together. Tell us how they intersect.
For me, they first started to intersect over land use issues. A lot of solar companies were having difficulty getting their sites approved on farmland because they were going to be taking the land out of farm use, and I saw honeybees as a way to maintain legal farm use and keep or create a lot of pollinator habitat in the same stroke, so to speak.
And so you have one of these sites in the Rogue Valley. Can you tell us a little bit about that project?
This project is the first site that we got bees on. We have 3 more pending, but it's a collaboration with Pine Gate Renewables, and they planted a bunch of native blooming species and invited me to bring my bees out. They were not required to keep up farm use there, but they just like the idea of doing that, and they understand, as many people do, that pollinator habitat loss is one of the drivers of loss of pollinators in general, not just honeybees.
Tell us a little bit more about the site, how big it is and when it was established or how the site was prepared.
The site, as far as I know, was completed construction last year. Last year was the first year we put bees on there. It's being planted in sequential steps. There was some plantings last fall. There's been some plantings this spring, and there's more planned. And the company doing the planting is a consultant company called Understory, and their specialty is native plants. So that's really unique about this site. Not all sites will be just native plants. So that's an extra challenge, but it's also really nice because I think it'll be really good for the native pollinators as well as the honeybees.
Why is pollinator-focused solar important for pollinators in the Rogue Valley?
Well, I think it's important for pollinators everywhere, not just the Rogue Valley. The need for electricity only increases, and solar is growing very rapidly. It's one of the fastest sectors of growing sectors of renewable energy. And, as we have faced declining pollinator habitat, this is an opportunity to use a lot of prime land for the benefit of pollinators. This is hopefully a model that will be adopted far and wide, not just here in Southern Oregon. Speaking
of local adoption, are there any other sites like this locally, or is this the only one in the area?
We have another site that I'm expected to bring bees out to this year, and then we have 2 more sites just outside of Portland in Clackamas County, and from what I gather, there are 5 gigawatts of solar planned for Southern Oregon, and the dual-use model will maximize the amount of acreage that are allowed.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why habitat for pollinators is needed in the area?
Well, our food supply is really dependent on pollinators. There's the old statistic that 1/3 of every bite that you eat is attributed to insect pollination. I think that's only true if you're eating a really poor diet. If you're eating a really healthy diet, you're probably eating 50% or more insect-pollinated foods. And habitat is disappearing for pollinators. That's driving the 6th extinction, it's called. Insects are disappearing very, very rapidly right now. And habitat loss is one of the drivers. And I see utility-scale solar as a solution because there's a lot of ground that's in and around the solar panels that could be converted to habitat. As an example, here in Southern Oregon, the hemp industry this last year has planted 48,000 acres of hemp, which is a huge monoculture. Monocultures are not very good for bees because it's a unifloral source, and then it's also hemp is a wind pollinated plant, so it makes no nectar. So fields that I used to be able to make honey on that contained various clovers and thistles and vetch. I mean, the list goes on and on. Like what nectar-bearing plants are just disappeared. And this is a challenge not only for managed honeybees, but also our native pollinators.
Thanks, John. With that, we'll take a break, and we'll be right back with more pollination. All right, and we're back here with John Jacob talking about pollinator-focused solar. Next question for you, John. Tell us a little bit more about your bees at the Eagle Point site and the establishment there. Did you have any hesitations about putting your bees there initially?
No, absolutely zero hesitation. It's a very unique and exciting opportunity to have some ground that's actually managed for pollinators. This is a very rare thing, and the biggest challenge I've found is just getting people to recognize that honeybees are illegal farm use. They're defined as livestock in Oregon state law, and it's just a great opportunity to have significant amount of ground these projects are managed for 30-year increments, so that's a long time to lock up some premium ground in pollinator habitat.
So I noticed you said this site is managed specifically for pollinators. How does that differ from other locations where you have your bees?
Well, we have two types of locations that we would bring our bees to. A lot of them are what I call wildlands, and you just get what you get, and those tend to be some of our best yards because they're not sprayed and they're not disturbed. The ground is not disturbed.
Like a forest?
Forest lands tend to not have the most nectar-bearing plants, but like oak savanna where there's a lot of vetch, and that urban wildland interface tends to be a really good spot for bees because there's stuff that gets irrigated, and then if you get lucky and the weather's nice, there's good wildflower flows. And another thing I really like about this site is there's zero insecticide use. And to go back to what I was saying before, the other type of land we go to is paid pollinations, where we do come in contact with insecticides and fungicides, and there's a lot of known risks and hazards to honeybees and wild pollinators from these sprays. So to have a decent chunk of ground that's not getting inundated with these chemicals is a huge upside.
So paid pollination sites, does that mean like someone's growing a crop and then you're paying a fee to put your bees on the site? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, it's the opposite. It is a crop, but they pay us to bring our bees. And, for example, we get paid to bring our bees to the almond pollination in California. We get about $210 a colony, and part of the reason why pollination prices have gotten so expensive, when I started in 2000, we were getting $40 a colony, and just this short 20-plus year period, that's a huge increase, and that's due to scarcity. That's in part because keeping honeybees alive is incredibly difficult. Next to the varroa mite, which is our probably number one problem, but habitat loss and agricultural sprays are probably the next two biggest things. So these solar sites are really important because they're like an oasis or it's a preserve, a pollinator preserve essentially, or potentially.
Do you think the installation of more sites like this will increase in Oregon, or do you think kind of this is the only one? What do you think we'll see in the next 10 years in this field in Oregon?
Oregon's passed some rules that are going to make it more challenging for solar on farmlands. But I think at the end of the day, we're going to see this model adopted far and wide because land is precious, and habitat is disappearing, and At the end of the day, food never goes out of style. So by protecting pollinators, we're protecting our food supply, and we're looking after our own best interests. And I think ultimately, I have faith that our fellow humans will understand that. And as climate change becomes more urgent, and will create incentive to use more renewable energy, that's going to take up some ground, and we could use that ground for pollinator habitat. I think it's a great mix.
Have you looked into any pollinator sites on wind or any other type of renewable energy sites?
Not too much, mostly because we don't have wind farms here in Southern Oregon, but I do know that there's a lot of farming that does go on around wind turbines. They're way up in the air and out of the way, and it's a little easier for people to conceive of farming that ground. A lot of times that is one of the challenges we faced is people just don't believe you can farm in and around these solar arrays. But there's people who graze sheep. We've got tractors that we can run in there. I mean, it's the only limitation is the creativity of the farmer and being able to select the right seeds and species that will love the slightly shadier environment.
Did I hear that right? Did you say that you're able to use a tractor underneath the solar panels?
Yes, Understory does have a small tractor they use there, and there's things that can be done to accommodate small farm equipment in there, like spacing the panels further apart and mounting them higher up. It just takes good planning on the front end of the developer to really think about the dual use model where they're going to plan so that you can get farm equipment in between the panels.
Are there any other ways that you have to modify a typical solar array in order to plant pollinator habitat or have a dual use agriculture system below it?
I don't really think so. I mean, the height and the spacing are the two biggest things, and then other than that, then it's just like farming. Like, what is your soil type? How much precipitation do you get? And there's been some great work done at OSU that talks about the extended period of soil moisture due to the shade, and so that will allow the selection of certain forage crops that might not have been viable before because things stay moist longer and you get extended blooming periods and things like that.
Talking briefly about the extended bloom period there, how might that change under a solar system?
Well, in my mind, that would be more days of nectar foraging. There's some good science that needs to be done. Like, if the bloom period is extended by 2 weeks or 3 weeks because it takes that much longer for the soil to dry out, is the water content of the nectar the same or not? But at the end of the day, I see this dual use model as about the only way honeybees and pollinators, and native pollinators in general, will ever get prime farm ground dedicated to them. Beekeepers are used to getting stuck with the drags, the ditch row that got missed on the spray, the fence line where they couldn't get the spray equipment to. And, as I said before, honeybees are legal farm use, and for once, maybe we can get some premium farm ground dedicated to growing some premium honeybees.
Great. Thank you, John. We're off for another break, and then we'll be back to ask John our 3 favorite questions that we ask every interviewee. Come back and join us on Pollination. All right, we're back here on Pollination with John Jacob. And we have 3 questions for you, John. We ask these to every guest on our show. The first is, do you have a book recommendation for the listeners today?
The book that I would recommend to everybody, beekeeper or not, is The Social Democracy of the Honeybee Hive by Thomas Seeley. It's just a fascinating study of a social insect that has been around since dinosaur times. It's been around a successful organism since before humans, and plus Tom's work, the way he does his experimental design is bar none. It's just really fascinating to see how he solves these mysteries of the honeybee hive. So I'd really recommend that book.
Great, thanks. And next question, what is your go-to tool that you use in your work?
That would be the hive tool, and specifically I like the Pro Lifter hive tool, not to endorse a particular one, but we break a lot of hive tools, and I've never broke one of these, and the hive tool is essentially the keys to the kingdom. Bees glue everything down with propolis, so you have to pry everything apart, and these boxes can weigh 100 pounds apiece, and they're glued together with propolis. You need a stout tool to separate those boxes, so the hive tool is the key to the bee kingdom.
For people who don't know, can you tell us what a hive tool looks like?
It's like a flat bar. It looks like a pry tool. It's kind of it's sharpened on one edge for splitting the boxes apart. The propolis is a plant resin that bees gather from trees, and as it turns out, they gather from trees and other plants, but around here mostly cottonwood trees. But it's highly medicinal, and it's also how they seal the hive, and it also makes it very difficult to get into the hive. They just glue everything down.
Wonderful, thanks. And our last question, what is your favorite pollinator?
Well, I guess I would have to say the honeybee, but, I have a hard time singling out one. I plant a lot of plants just to attract native pollinators that don't really attract honeybees, but the honeybees are very fascinating, and the evolution of the relationship between humans and honeybees goes back so far, and it's just a fascinating history there, and there's such a linchpin in our food supply. It's really hard not to just absolutely love the honeybee.
Wonderful. Thank you, John. We appreciate your time, and thank you for telling us about pollinator-focused solar here in the Rogue Valley.
Thanks so much for listening. Show notes with information discussed in each episode can be found at pollinationpodcast.oregonstate.edu. We'd also love to hear from you, and there are several ways to connect. For one, you can visit our website to post an episode-specific comment, suggest a future guest or topic, or ask a question that could be featured in a future episode. You can also email us at pollinationpodcast@oregonstate.edu. Finally, you can tweet questions or comments or join our Facebook or Instagram communities. Just look us up at OSU Pollinator Health. If you like the show, consider letting iTunes know by leaving us a review or rating. It makes us more visible, which helps others discover pollination. See you next week.